Welcome to another TV bookshelf. Today we're talking with Kathryn Sullivan, and she is going to talk about her two books, one of which is a fantasy book and the other which is a collection of science fiction and fantasy short stories. So Kathryn, start with one of your books and tell us all about it.
Oh, okay. Well, the first book is Crystal Throne. It's young adult fantasy. First version of it I wrote back when I was about 14, and I've been sending it out and getting rejected, and finally got it published in December 2000. And it won an award right after that, an Epi for the best fantasy from the Electronic Published Authors Association called EPIC. And also came out in 2003 is my collection of short stories, both young adult fantasy and science fiction, Agents and Adepts. It was a finalist for an Epi for Best Anthology. Didn't win this year, but
Let's start with the Crystal Throne. Tell us the basic plot. What's it about? Is it set in a fantasy world? Is it set on Earth?
Well, it starts off on Earth. There's two 12-year-olds their assignment is to write something about the haunted tree in the nearby forest. Jeannie Tucker reads fantasy, and Peter Burns does not read fantasy. He doesn't believe in magic, and also he's going out to explore the haunted tree as if it's biology. What is this with the haunted tree? And before they realize that they get pulled into the haunted tree and into a magical world where they're asked to break a curse. Now, Jeannie, of course, reading fantasy, recognizes elves and wizards right away, and she believes this whole thing. And Peter's, forget this, these people are crazy, let's go home. But they can't leave until they actually break the curse. So along the way, you encounter elves, you encounter fleet ones, who are huge horse-like beings. And it just goes on.
Is there any central message? Is there any central message to the book?
Don't believe everything you see. Don't distrust everything you see, too, because one of the reasons Peter doesn't understand the horse-like beings is that he's a scientist in a way. I mean, he's 12 years old, but he doesn't believe in the fact that horses can talk. Horses can't talk. So throughout most of the book, he can't understand what they're saying. While I was trying to find a market for the Crystal Throne, I kept writing other short stories based in the universe where some of my other characters came from, and that's where they evolved, and they were published elsewhere. And that's where the stories for Agents and Adepts came from.
Now, Agents and Adepts then is set in the same universe as the Crystal Throne?
Some of the short stories are. Some of them are set in the science fiction world that I've also got established. So for some of the stories in Agents and Adepts, I've got stories set in the back history of the Crystal Throne, when humans were still inhabiting the world, or when some of the fleet ones met the elves, how they paired up, and some of the science fiction stories. Some of them are standalone stories, some of them are ones where I have intergalactic agents, and some of those start off with Earth and then they go off into outer space.
Tell us, you mentioned that humans used to be in the universe of the Crystal Throne. What happened to them?
Well, there was this huge war, and the humans didn't like the fact that the elves didn't want to teach them magic. And some of them retreated back through we call it the haunted tree. But they also call it the Watcher of Gates. Other ones stayed behind, and those who stayed behind were massacred. So the only humans left in the world at the time of the Crystal Throne are the wizards who used to be human at one time. So when Peter and Jeannie first step into the world, you have a lot of beings going, humans, oh my gosh, there's humans back in the world.
So there's a lot of magic in there.
Yes, in the Crystal Throne, yes.
And the standalone science fiction stories. Tell us about some of them.
Some of them are very short. I have one story where we have a telepath in a time period where she thinks she's the only telepath on Earth, and she's not understanding where she gained the powers. And she's contacted by somebody else. So part of the story, she's trying to figure out where this telepathic voices come from. And that's the whole point of the story. So the other ones are set in my Interstellar Agents story, where one short story is basically her being contacted by an outer space agency, recruiting her to help protect Earth from some of the League's worlds who tend to like play God on other planets. And the next story in that series is her testing whether or not she can actually be undercover in an alien world and not be detected. And then the third story in that series is when her twin is being brought into this because Janice suddenly vanishes and the agency can't find her, but her twin realizes there's something wrong with her. And that one's called The Twin Bond.
Were these published in science fiction magazines, or were they just first published in the collection?
They were first published in semi-pro zines. One was published in the Minnesota's Fantasy Review. Another one was published in Fury. And those are semi-professional magazines. A couple of them are published in fanzines. And of course, they're ostensibly reworked to get into this collection.
Were all the stories in the short story collection, were they all previously published, or were some of them just written for that collection especially?
There were at least two that were written that I just never found a home for, and they ended up in the collection because they had, one of them was Smoke stories. She's one of the younger version of one of the wizards from the Crystal Throne, and her adventures when she first starts using her powers. And I'm blanking on the other one. But there's 16 stories in Agents and Adepts. Two of them were never published before. One of them was in my Mead Mistdaughter series, and it just never found a home after a couple of the zines who had asked for it folded. Mead Mistdaughter is in the Free Trader universe in the Crystal Throne world, back when the humans were still in the world. And she is a trader. She travels between the human kingdoms. She's one of those people who still has a friendly relationship with the elves. And all of a sudden, the first story in the series, she discovers in the middle of an ogre battle, she falls across a branch and no weapon, so she's using it as a quarterstaff. And all of a sudden, it turns into this polished white wooden thing. And this was just a branch that fell off a tree. Turns out it's a wizard who is trying to find apprentices, and he's decided that Mead would be a wonderful apprentice. And throughout most of the story, she's going, I don't want to be an apprentice, I don't want magic, go away. And he keeps saying, oh, you've got to find me, you've got to solve this riddle, and you're going to make a wonderful apprentice.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. How did the writing journey go?
Oh, well, my father read science fiction and fantasy, so he always had a huge collection. And we even had it at our summer cottage. For one summer, I read every book Dad had. I was 14 at the time, I was bored stiff, and I decided, okay, I can write this. And I started writing my own stories. I just taught myself how to type and just kept writing stories in the worlds. And Crystal Throne was about the third book-length novel I wrote. First reject on that was from 1972, so yeah, I've been trying to publish it for a while. And that's the one I strongly believed in because I knew I really, really liked that universe, and just kept writing.
Okay. Tell us about your publishing journey. I particularly understand that you're into ebooks.
Yes, Crystal Throne came out from an ebook publisher that I've since left. I'm now with another publisher, Amberquill Press. They publish it both in e-format and in trade paperback format. And it seems to be doing rather well. I belong to an organization with electronically published authors, so we basically will support each other and point out who has openings, who's looking for other authors. And I like e-publishing because it's so nice. I've got my PDA. I can read my PDA anywhere. Bring it with me before a movie starts. I can be reading my PDA with the backlight on because I don't have to worry about when they turn off the lights. I can read it through all those movie commercials. You can read it and I can hold so many more books because I'm one of those people that when I was growing up reading, I always had to carry a separate suitcase for my books just to read. I can carry 10 books at a time on my ebook readers. My new PDA, I've got 10 books in HTML format and 5 in PDF format, and it's so convenient.
And both books are in the ebook format?
Right.
Both books are currently available in the ebook form.
Ebooks, yes,
Okay.
as well as trade paperback.
As well as trade paperback. That's great. And your publisher publishes both at the same time.
Right.
Okay. How is your ebook following? Do you have any statistics or any idea of the relative audience, or do you get any feedback from the ebook readers?
Not yet. I've run into those people at conventions who've read the ebook format and the trade paperback, so I'm not quite sure which version they read. I know the royalties have been coming in very well for both, and my publisher's now worked out a deal with FictionWise, who handles e-formats for journals and a lot of e-publishers, as well as the New York publishers who have now started going into e-format.
Would you recommend ebook for other authors? Or?
Those people who can't find, if you're writing cross-genre, if you're writing mid-list, because mid-list books are for some reason other than New York publishers aren't picking them up as much. E-format is the place to go. Royalty payments are higher. Distribution's still a little bit off because they're still working out that process. But yes, I'd recommend it.
Do you contact ebook publishers through the web?
Yes, through the web. Epic is an organization that will have a listing of electronically published publishers, and there are several directories out there on the web that will have a recommended list of e-publishers. You have to be careful with that, just like with any other publisher. You need to check out their contracts.
Do readers then download the ebooks, or
Right.
do they're not mailed a CD or a disc?
You've got choices. It depends on the publisher. My publisher, after 9/11, no longer ships anything out because there's just too much of a worry of things going through the mail. So you can basically, you pay by credit card or PayPal, and you just download it to your computer. You can choose HTML, PDF, LIT, RTF, and Microsoft Reader. Other publishers like Writers Express will mail you CDs that has all the formats on one CD, so you can choose that way. Some other publishers will send diskette or download.
Have you started writing other books now?
I'm doing 3 books simultaneously, which is not a good idea. But I have a sequel to The Crystal Throne that I'm working on right now. I've got a sequel to a short story that I have by another publisher. I'm working on a sequel to that. That's set in the far future in a colony world. And I'm working on another story that I just haven't developed enough to know if it's going to be science fiction or fantasy. I just have this character who keeps insisting that she has to have her story told, and a stubborn character.
So you have 3. They're all 3 novels.
Right.
And
I also have a children's illustrated book coming out later on this year from Writers Express.
is that also ebook?
It'll be coming out ebook format. I'm not quite sure if they're going to do trade, but it's going to be an illustrated children's book. And the nice thing I like about it, I've worked out with the illustrator that not only will you have the color illustrations, but you have at the end there'll be a PDF file with the illustrations in black and white that kids can print out and color themselves.
Oh, that is tremendous. How is the children's market for ebooks?
It depends on which publisher you're talking to. There used to be a bigger market with the publishers for the e-formatted children's books, but now it's dwindled to only about 3 publishers handling it. But the ones who are doing it extremely well. One is also doing audiobooks as well as typical illustrations, and that's Writers Exchange. Hardshell, Word Factory used to do children's books, and I know they still have some, but they're not accepting any new books.
In your ebook authors, do you get a lot of feedback on the web? Do you get emails to you from people who have read your books? Or?
I haven't gotten any yet. I had feedback when my books were out in an e-zine, when a couple of my short stories were in an e-zine. I haven't gotten any forwarded to me lately from my publisher, so either people really like it, but not enough to comment on it, or
So
more.
most of your feedback is from people coming up to you at conventions,
Right.
and things. Okay.
And a couple of times when I was doing signings in my small town, because my books are available in the bookstores there, and I've had kids come up and say, "I've read your book," and what happened with Evelyn? With not Evelyn, Elin, who's one of the horse-like beings. Next,
Are the younger readers particularly into the ebook phenomenon?
I think so, but again, I can't quite tell in my town if this the people who read the e-format or the trade. I'm just so overwhelmed that they like it. I don't stop and ask them what format they read.
I see. I see. Are you? Do you? It sounds as if you do a lot of very different writing. You do children's, and you do fantasy, and you do science fiction. And your children's books are also science fiction and fantasy. Is that correct?
It's the Michael and the Elf. It's a fantasy that's
It's a
coming
fantasy.
out. Yeah.
So the children's books are also fantasy.
Yeah, I tend to write that. It's basically
Oh, sure.
that's what I grew up reading, and that's what I enjoy, and I just want to keep letting other people enjoy that same genres.
Okay. And do you hear from? You mentioned a group of ebook publishers or an ebook organization
Called Epic, yes.
Called Epic. Can you tell us a little bit about Epic?
Epic has been around since about 1998 when some of the first ebooks came out, and a lot of the authors are feeling disenfranchised from like the Science Fiction Writers of America and the Romance Writers of America, because at that point they don't count ebooks as really books. And it started off as an organization where people could actually mutual support, spread ideas. Here's a good way to promote your book. Oh, here's a publisher you want to avoid. Oh, this is a really good publisher. That type of information.
So it's an organization of authors?
Organization of authors.
Of ebook authors.
Of ebook authors. We've already started admitting publishers as well, because a lot of e-publishers are also authors at the same time. And they just also offered, allowed people who weren't published yet or were thinking about being published in the e-field to actually join the organization as well, because that way you also find out who's looking for books, what's the best way to market it. They aren't doing ones who haven't been published anywhere, but it's basically if you've been published and are leaning toward the e-format, it's open for membership there too. It's a really good organization. We spread a lot of information, share a lot, and sometimes you only find out about the growth of the e-publishing field by being in such an organization, because the news stories are far and few between. And usually any time the newspapers mention e-publishing is after the fall of the .coms. They basically are always saying, "Oh, ebooks never happen." Well, the sales of ebooks have been about $3 million worth the last couple quarters, so I think ebooks are kind of taking off. And now that more and more people are starting to realize they can read ebooks on their PDAs, it's starting to take off a bit more.
Well, that is amazing, because quite often you do hear in the news media that ebooks are dying, that it's
It's a fad that never caught on.
Not caught on.
Yeah.
A bunch of distributors have dropped their ebooks.
With Gemstar folding, that didn't help much.
Yeah, and you think that ebooks are on the decline, but it sounds as if they're on the rise.
They are, and when publishers like Bain, with the Honor Harrington series, they put a CD with all the previous Honor Harrington stories, as well as the James Smith's books on the CD. It was great. I could go back and catch up on stories I hadn't found and read them on my PDA.
Well, that is wonderful. Tell us more about the growth of the ebooks. This is groundbreaking.
Well, it really would be great if they would agree on one standard. The best one, well, I don't want to take it out at the moment unless you really want me to, was the Rocket Reader. And that only accepted books in HTML format, but it was a nice size, good size screen. You could turn it, you could read, you could prop it up on a table, and you could just turn the screen any way you wanted. And then, unfortunately, that was taken over by Gemstar, who didn't do anything with it. And they decided to make it proprietary, and when you can only read one thing on one reader, it didn't work out. So the market seems to be going more towards doing many things on one machine. So that's why the growth of the PDAs have been popular, because of course you can do email, you've got your calendar on there, you've got all these other features, and there's your ebook reader. So that seems to be taking off a little bit more. The problem is they don't agree on standards. So you've got Microsoft doing their standard, which won't agree with the Adobe Acrobat, won't agree with the Palm Pilot. So it's basically, I keep trying to find one of these PDAs that will handle everything. And right now my PDA will handle Adobe Acrobat, it'll handle HTML, I can read in documents to go. I've got Palm Reader on there, which takes up a lot of memory, so I always can only have one book at a time on that format. But it's the way to go, I think.
Oh, okay.
My luggage is much lighter when I can only put it on one reader instead of having to lug all the books with me. Although since I'm a science fiction fan, I'm a collector. If I really like it in my PDA, I will still go back and buy the hardcover to have on my shelf.
So both of the formats benefit then.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. And people who read an ebook, they'll quite often go out and buy a hard copy for themselves.
Especially for collectors, yeah.
For the collectors.
But the nice thing is, if you're on a budget, the downloads are much cheaper than the paperbacks. Well, hardcovers basically, because I can't mention price. But when you're talking about the price of a paperback, sometimes the downloads are cheaper than that. And it's helping that the New York publishers are starting to get aware of this, because for a while the e-formats they were offering, and this is why the sales were affected for them, because they were offering ebooks the same price as their hardcover books. Now who's going to pay $20-something dollars for an electronic version? The independent publishers, of course, have been offering a lot cheaper, so hopefully sales are becoming better. Right now the big sales in the e-field are the romances. And I keep hoping science fiction is going to pick up a little bit more. What I keep hearing from my publishers, the romances are selling very well, and so are the dark fantasy. I'm doing young adult fantasy. Well, hopefully
you'll catch on.
Well, especially when you figure most kids are getting used to reading, using their Game Boys, reading electronically on their computer. So they're not as afraid of computers as their adults and grandparents are.
And that the romance field is taking off is most interesting.
One of the things I've heard from one of the romance writers is that she thought it might have been that way because you can read it on an ebook reader on the bus and not have to worry about the cover of the book. So that's one of the reasons why they seem to like that a little better.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's very interesting. What other signs of growth do you see in the ebook field?
Fiction-wise, this is a company that basically distributes a lot of ebooks, magazine articles. They've got the Newsweek, Time, as well as signing up with the New York distributors. And Fiction-wise has now got a new branch called LibWise, or LibWise, where they're actually going to be working with public libraries so that you can check out an ebook, load it onto your PDA, and read it from the library. They're developing the software so that it would be treated like a library book. It's got software so that you can set the time period, and after a certain amount of days, the ebook vanishes from your reader. And then the next person from the library can check out that book.
That is amazing. What other things are there anything else coming up in the ebook field?
That's the only one I've heard of so far, other than the electronic ink. They've got the new screen that's going to be a little bit flatter. I don't know the details enough about it, but it's going to be working more with the tablet PCs, I think.
Okay. Well, that's great that it's in a library. And you are a librarian.
I'm a librarian. I'm a university librarian.
Okay. And so are you finding e-books coming into the library system? Are you cataloging them? Or?
Yes, we get them through Net Library, though, and these are more reference books, a lot more nonfiction. The public libraries tend to look for the fiction books. La Crosse Public Library, for example, has the e-books on electronic. They still have the Rocket readers, and they download a certain set amount of books onto the reader and check out the entire reader to their patrons.
So it's possible. So it's it's possible to find ebooks in both nonfiction and fiction.
Correct.
And a lot of reference books are in ebooks?
Oh yes, our budget at I work at Winona State University, and we have part of our budget devoted to Net Library because we have a lot of distance students. And using Net Library, they can actually read the book online. And for the nursing students, it's very, very popular. And with Net Library, they can basically just check on the chapter they're looking for and bring it up right away. And it's much easier to search electronically than it is for a chapter within a book than it is to thumb through the index.
I didn't know that. That is great. Anything else that you want to add for ebooks or your books, or anything that you want the viewers to know? It's a fascinating field.
Ebooks seem to be coexisting quite well with regular science fiction, so do not be afraid of ebooks. They are not out to replace your paper collection. They're there to help. And it's so much easier to read sometimes.
And there are more coming, and you won't really want to publish with ebooks when you're...
I'm still sticking with it too. Yeah.
Okay, so you're looking for an ebook when you're finished with your books. You are going to be looking for an ebook publisher.
Definitely, yes. Probably be looking with Amber Quill first, see if they're interested, and then if not, I know of at least 3 other publishers who people need to take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. Have any publishers contacted you and say, well, we'd like you to write us for it, or do you just contact the publishers?
Mundania Press basically was looking on Hardshell Word Factory because I've been working with one of the authors there, and they're like, you got any other books that you want to send our way?
Well, that's
which is rather encouraging.
Oh yes, it's great to be in demand. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Kathryn, and we're happy to have you here today and talking about ebooks, a fascinating subject, and your 2 books, and they are again?
The Crystal Throne, which is young adult fantasy, and Agents and Adepts, which is a collection of short stories, fantasy and science fiction.
Okay, and the ones that you're working on aren't sold yet, so you don't have any titles for that.
I've got a working title for the one. Okay, for the one, I've got a working title of Talking to Trees. Coming out later this year, the children's illustrated book is Michael and the Elf. And from Mundania Press, I've got a short story called Oracle of Cleans, coming from Mundania Press's collection called Beyond Mundania, Flights of Mind.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Kathryn. We've enjoyed talking to you, and very good luck with your work.
Thank you very much.
This has been TV Bookshelf, and we're wrapping up for this interview. Thank you.